Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I'm going to be talking about Heartbreakers. So tabletop role-playing games. So I'm writing a tabletop role-playing game called Solnar Swift Arc. It's a new world and a new rules engine, right? And so I've been thinking a lot about, tabletop role-playing games and what you need to do to build a good one. And it is challenging. It's not an easy thing to do. And, so I just really been thinking a lot about it. And one of the things I watched a YouTube channel, and they had a new creator, and that new creator was creating a tabletop role-playing game and was discussing, openly what was going to be coming out of that tabletop role-playing game. So I'm really trying to avoid a lot of pitfalls with this, and the reason why is the pitfalls are very, very clear, right? There are literally hundreds of tabletop role-playing games out there, and it's really clear what makes, I think a lot of times it's very clear what makes bad ones. So one of the things I've been doing, and one of the reasons why I've decided to create my own tabletop role-playing games, is a podcast called System Mastery. It's a very unusual podcast. It has about 70 or 80 episodes right now. It's two comedians who take old tabletop role-playing games, and usually bad ones. They search for bad role-playing games, and they call them Heartbreakers, right? And what they define a tabletop role-playing game that's a heartbreaker is, they're saying that essentially, and I think this is very true, when you are creating a tabletop role-playing game, you are creating that tabletop role-playing game for a very specific reason, right? And there's some good reasons and some bad reasons. And these guys have pointed out that one of the biggest reasons that people create tabletop role-playing games, that is absolutely the genesis of a heartbreaker, is people who are like, hey, I see this tabletop role-playing game, and there's this one thing I don't like longbows. This game gets longbows completely wrong. And I'm going to show what it's like to do a really realistic, role-playing game with longbows the way they're supposed to. And the range on those longbows is going to be correct. And there's going to be hit location, and there's going to be lethal damage, and it's going to take weeks to, recover your damage, and it's going to be much more realistic. There are probably over 100 role-playing games that was built with that one impetus. Somebody read a tabletop role-playing game and goes, this isn't realistic enough. I have knowledge about this one specific niche, and I'm going to make this tabletop role-playing game so that it's much better, right? And it's going to be awesome, right? Because it's going to be better and more realistic, right? Well, this is a bad genesis, right? Now, the guys on System Mastery, I've listened to every single, they have 80 episodes up, right? But only half, they alternate. So they'll actually do a review on one of these games. So I've listened to them rip apart literally 35, 40 different games, right? And just tear into them and say every single thing that's wrong with them. And I mean, some of them are eviscerations, and some of them are, it's really interesting seeing these guys. They know a lot about tabletop role-playing games, and I think they definitely know what makes them bad. I'm not sure if they know what makes them good. But one of the things, Haven City of Violence is one of the ones they just went to town on. And the only reason I call that out is that, even now, 35, 40 podcasts later, where they've covered different games, they still use the name of that game in a mocking way, which is really, I think, a little bit cruel. But I'm a huge fan of the podcast, because it's just the way they deconstruct these games is, for a game designer, a tabletop role-playing game designer, I feel like this is like game design 101. You really need to see up close and personal what hundreds of, game designers have already failed trying to do, right? So, and I think that's the biggest thing, is people going, I'm going to change 10% of the existing game, and that's going to be enough to win the hearts and minds of the market. And I'll have a pretty cool, and some guys, they don't, and ladies, they don't even really have a great world in mind. They just want to, change the rules segment and show, this is more European, or this is more, realistic, or this is a better understanding of medieval culture. Those like hobby horses, right? They're just really distinct hobby horses. So I really want to be careful about avoiding this, and so that's one of the reasons why I have this really, really laser focus on what is the goal of Solnar Swift Arc. And I appreciate you guys being patient, because I know I'm saying this again and again, but I think I'm just getting it in my head as I go forward, because once you are in a game and you're designing it, it's easy to let your goals slip and change, especially when good ideas come up, right? And my entire goal is tell stories faster. And the reason why is I'm absolutely, there's multiple reasons. I think it's a good goal, right? And one of the reasons why is we've reached a point where tabletop role-playing games as entertainment has really arrived. There are hundreds of thousands, if not well over 1 million people. Well, actually, Matt Mercer has 2 million views on one of his games. There are millions, just enough to qualify for that number, of viewers who will watch a tabletop role-playing game as entertainment, which is astounding. Now, that millions is in the single digits, but it is millions of viewers, right? And I really feel like we need to build games that recognize this new fact of the industry and are going to tell games that are told at a very high rate, right? And one of the things that's interesting is there, in order to know what a tabletop role-playing game is, there are a lot of people, if you ask people what is a tabletop role-playing game, the number one answer by far is it's just like playing Cowboys and Indians when you were a kid. It's just like it's playing pretend with a lot of rules, right? And I feel like this is a fundamentally broken definition. Really, what tabletop role-playing games are is they are communal storytelling tools that tell stories with randomness and rules mechanics. That's it. They are incredibly complex. It is not anything like playing pretend. When you're playing pretend, anybody can do anything, right? And you just throw ideas out there. And really, that's not the case with tabletop role-playing games. There's an incredible amount of design that goes into them. And basically, we want free-form ideals to be able to come into play, but we want a structure around that where it's going to tell a cohesive story with a start, a middle, and an end. And we also want everybody at that table to have fun. And now, this is the new 2016 goal. We want the people who are watching them to have fun, right? And I think this is huge, because right now we are in a golden era of absolute, fantastic entertainment from television and film, right? But tabletop role-playing games are extremely special, because what a tabletop role-playing game is it is a story. It is just like a video game, just like a movie, just like a television, with no budget, limitations. No budget limitations. That's huge, right? We can throw in anything we want because it all happens in our minds, right? And so that's really exciting to be able to tell these stories communally using randomness and rules, right? And do it. And the last part I want to do is I want to add in the word quickly, right? I am a big fan. I've become recently a very, very big fan of Dungeon Girl, and she is a very experienced dungeon master from the UK. I believe she's from the UK, and she was recently talking about Shadowrun and what a brilliant, wonderful world it is. So Shadowrun's one of my favorite worlds, and I absolutely love it. I think it's it's one of the best games out there, but it has a terrible, terrible rule system, and I've always felt this, right? Well, Dungeon Girl said the same thing, in a video she just put up, right? And the reason why is the combats are outrageously slow, right? And you can have dice pools that are 10, 20, 10 or 20 dice large. And so this all slows down the game. And so being able to tell these stories quickly is absolutely critical, right? So, you know, I was listening to this one recent designer, and I really feel like he's well on the way to building a Heartbreaker. And the reason why is he's saying, my game is like this game, my game is like that game. And, you know, and there are things like lethal damage, you know, like this whole hobby horse of let's make these games realistic. That's just not the trend for tabletop role-playing games. And it's not the trend for telling stories quickly, right? And the reason why is there's these mistakes that continue to get made in tabletop role-playing games, right? Lethal damage and realistic violence is a horrible idea in role-playing games. This has been proven again and again and again, right? And one of the biggest things here is the reality is if you have, you know, if you have damage that remains, static damage that is realistic, so like your arm breaks and then you need to heal over weeks or months, right? Or that damage is going to give you a -2 permanently, right? This has already been established to be a number one fail, right? And the reason why is the stories continue. And so no one's going to, you know, a bunch of adventurers are not going to sit around while one of their arms heal. They're just going to go out and they're going to adventure, right? And player characters are like that. They're not, they will not wait, right? And so, you know, it was just really interesting hearing this guy talk about his game because he, you know, I feel like he's building a Heartbreaker. One of the things that really concerned me was there were certain games that are fundamental that have been out for like 2, 3, 4, 5 years that this designer was not aware of, right? And to me, if you're going to design a tabletop role-playing game, don't look at Pathfinder, don't look at Dungeons & Dragons and stop there and then do a 15 or a 20% rules tweak on those games because you're just making a clone, right? And you're going to get a part of the market. You're going to get, you know, 10 or 20% of the market if you're lucky. If you execute perfectly with a clone, you're going to get 10 or 20% of the market. But this is a niche market, right? And what I really want to accomplish is I want to accomplish what my design heroes have done. A perfect Luke Crane, right? He wrote Burning Wheel and he wrote Mouse Guard, right? He's writing a game right now called Inheritance. What did he accomplish? Luke Crane has really never accomplished growing the tabletop role-playing game industry, right? This stuff is super niche. But what he did design and what he mastered was rules elegance. His rules are elegant, right? And his rules design is super sleek and elegant. You know, the rules he creates are a beauty to behold, right? Monty Cook, I believe has accomplished multiple things. He has grown the tabletop role-playing game market. He has shattered every record on Kickstarter except one, which is the $. But even that one, if you add up all the ones he's done, he's defeated John Wick, right? All these, you know, like and what he has mastered is modern tabletop role-playing game publishing, and he has also mastered innovation, right? And so, you know, those are just two of the guys. Robin Laws is another guy who's out there who's, you know, what has he really brought to the table? And one of the things he did was the gumshoe system, right? He solved the problem for how to create a mystery tabletop role-playing game. There wasn't a huge market for that, and so I think a lot of his material, it doesn't really see the light of day, and it doesn't see, a lot of players don't see it, but it really is, he's one of the best designers out there. So, you know, one, I appreciate you guys just hearing me out on this stuff. I'm still just kind of, you know, going through my mind, how do I make this game great? You know, that's my point, is I don't want to, and if you look at Solnar Swift Art, I am changing the way rolls are made, the dice pools. Like, one of the things, you know, like in Solnar Swift Art, it changes so many things, right? So one of the things that every tabletop role-playing game, you brought your own dice. Well, in this one, you don't bring your own dice, and the reason why is there's a set dice pool that's shared by every single player, and the DM and the game master doesn't touch those dice. That's new. It's never been done in any tabletop role-playing game I've ever seen. Right? The color of the dice matters. I'm going to be using positioning. Where you place your dice, orientated around your character sheet, will matter. Right? So I'm really swinging for the fences. I'm putting in a lot of changes. Now, the danger with that is when you create a lot of changes, you get to the point where you can make something so alien that people are just confused and can't follow it. Perfect example of this was the game that was created by Margaret Weiss, the Marvel game. I loved it. I thought it was excellent. I thought it was a really, really solid game. It was completely non-intuitive. And you had to have master-level players and master-level game masters to be successful with that game, right? So I have to avoid that trap of falling down where I put in so many things that it's inaccessible to people, right? The other thing is there's just all these guys out there who have created games and they just failed. Like, even though they were great games. Another one is Apocalypse World, right? The guy I don't know who made Apocalypse World. I know Dungeon World because it's brilliant and it's beautiful and it's playable. Apocalypse World was an awesome rule system with a world that was highly inaccessible by design, right? It's about the apocalypse, right? Why you would take one of the most innovative design systems ever created and hide it in a game that was inaccessible to many teenagers, which is generally where a lot of people start tabletop role-playing game, is really odd, right? But then somebody came along and turned that into Dungeon World. And Dungeon World is fantastic. Dungeon World is a really, really solid, great game, and highly playable. So I'm just trying to, throw the powder on the floor and see where the traps are and get this right. So, thanks everybody for listening, and take care. Have a good one.